So the common issues that I have, and I'm just going to run through a quick agenda. Limitations. Everybody wants to know what they can do and what they can't do. So I talk about limitations with regard to meetings and with regard to debates and with regard to speaker recognition and with regard to audience participation. When I talk to members of council over 25 years as to what's been frustrating, they say things to me like, well, the audience just has too much to say, and they're delaying our meetings out into the wee hours of the morning. Recognize that I've had the privilege of being in public meetings until way after the next day starts, and I made a ruling in that particular community that you've called your agenda meeting for this date, and as soon as midnight strikes, it's now a different date. So ultimately, the continuation of meetings beyond that witching hour, we deal with issues relating to fatigue, and that certainly can't be good for a government function.
Yes.
So I sit down and I say, can you debate meeting length? I'm under a time constraint this evening. I have another commitment this evening. I probably would like to be out of here at 7 o'clock tonight. I can probably stretch that to 7:30 without offending the people that are waiting for me after this, but certainly I would at the very least need a recess to make a phone call, to make other arrangements for my next commitment of the evening. You can limit meeting lengths. There's nothing that says that you can't. But it's totally and completely within the control of the chair to set those limitations. And it's also totally and completely within the control of council to extend them. So if you wanted to limit debate, or if you wanted to limit the meeting length, you can always have a vote and a majority say, nope, we're going to go past whatever the witching hour might be for the limited time for debate or limited time for a meeting. I like limitations on meetings. That's going to sound pretty strange. But if you sit down and you know you only have a certain time period in order to convey your thoughts and ideas, it makes you pretty cogent in how you want to present your logic and how you want to present your ideas. Might sound like I'm talking down to people and I'm offending people when I say this, but it's kind of like preparation in advance versus preparation while you're at the meeting. There are some debates that come up just out of the blue and everybody's getting educated, but the ones that are on a published agenda, you should read the proposed legislation. You should talk amongst yourselves. You should talk to the constituents that you trust. You should talk to business owners. You should talk to people to find out what the general flavor in your ward would be, or in your district would be, so that you can come in and you can convey those thoughts appropriately for the people that you represent. There's nothing against you having discussions amongst yourselves with regard to items that are going to be on your agenda. There's nothing against that. Everybody has a fear that sunshine laws are going to come in and preclude you from calling each other and having discussions about issues. That's not what the sunshine law is all about at all. It's all about making decisions outside the scope of public purview and outside the scope of a public meeting. So just don't engage in any decision making. You're allowed to state your position. You're allowed to have arguments amongst yourselves. You're allowed to be persuasive. You're allowed to try and convince people to see things your way, and they're going to try and convince you to see things their way. And ultimately, hopefully, you're going to be in a position where you can blend the two, and everybody gets a certain amount of satisfaction.
Madam Chair.
I believe Mr. Blair has the floor.
Yes, I just thought I might make a comment here briefly.
Blair?
I didn't hear what he said.
He wants to make a comment. I told him he did not have the
Well, I'm going to have plenty of time for questions and answers. I only have about a 15-minute presentation, and I'm only part of the way through. So just hold that thought and write that down. So to answer these questions with regard to meeting length, you can set a time definitive for a meeting that will start at 6 o'clock and end at 8. And that just means that agenda, everybody is cogent that we have that. If it becomes time consuming and more time consuming than you thought, that meeting time can always be extended. We can do the same thing with regard to the debate of any issues. Okay, if you want to extend it, it would be extended by motion, it would be seconded, and the majority would then vote to either extend it, or the majority would vote to have that extension fail. So you have that complete ability to take care of those issues, all totally within your control, even though it's precipitated initially probably by the chair, if there were any issues that would require ardent debate. Having said that, please remember my caveat that I think the most predominant debates should be taking place in the committee format rather than the council format. Most of the time, by the time there's council, you have the people who are going to vote nay, you have the people who are going to vote yea, give them the opportunity to state their position so everybody out there understands why they're going to vote nay or why they're going to vote yea, so that that's clear, and then you just go straight to the vote. Recognition of council members is always an interesting debate because everybody wants their time to state their position. I think that for any recognizable debate, whether it's in a committee structure or whether it's on council's floor, there should be at least 2 opportunities to recognize each member of council. The first opportunity would be for their statement of position. The second opportunity would be for rebuttal. And so that you can make comments with regard to any thoughts that might have been portrayed. Sometimes that can be, well, councilperson thus and so raised an issue that I hadn't really thought of before, or councilperson, I'm not swayed by any argument by any other members of council. It can be as simple as that. What I try to avoid is there being a debate that gets personal, looks like it's attack-worthy. You're all entitled to your opinion. We don't all have to agree. That's what makes us great. That's what makes you a representative body. Some people are going to be taking different positions on legislation than others. You just can't be afraid to speak up and state your position. Again, that's another thing that allows people to do their homework before they come in so that they can make their positions known, so that hopefully you can come to some consensus as you go through that debate process. With regard to audience participation, you will debate within the confines of your council rules. I think the audience should have an opportunity to participate in 2 different places in your agenda. It's just a personal opinion, but I've been doing it for a long time and it makes the audience feel real good. Before you vote on legislation, give them an opportunity to make their last-ditch comments about how they feel about proposed legislation before you vote. A lot of cities that I initially come into has everybody speak after the legislation has been ruled on. Well, what's the point then? It's already done. So give them an opportunity to talk about agenda-related items before you vote on those agenda-related items. So before your legislative docket, give them an opportunity to speak as to how they feel that legislation should go. After the legislation and before council's comments, give an opportunity to approach council again with any issues that they would like council to consider for future meetings and or future discussion either in committee or as a committee of the whole. So if they do think they need a stop sign at a certain intersection or a street light rather than a 4-way stop, they can bring that up, and then council, when it's time for them to make their comments afterwards, say, they bring up a good point, why don't we refer that to the safety committee or refer that issue to finance committee. So it gives them an opportunity to feel like they're participating in the government and how government works. Sometimes council people give me frustrations because they don't know how to present their issues to council. You would need to review your council rules to make it certain that there's a number of ways to do that. First, contacting chairmen of committees and asking them to put that on their committee's agenda for discussion. That would be a way that I would approach any issue. So if I have a safety issue, I got 3 phone calls over the weekend about a safety concern, then maybe that might need to be discussed. You would notify the safety committee chairman, and they might bring that up for discussion at their meeting of their particular committee. You could attend that committee meeting, and you could also raise it as a member of the audience. Yes, you're a member of council, but you are also a constituent of the community, so you're totally open to audience participation on your own part. You can also contact and have that brought up on your council agenda, and if you decide to keep it as it's currently worded, you would bring it up on your council agenda at the time for council comments and ask that that be referred to committee for discussion and review. That also is very open. One of the reasons I think that provision might be in there is because when you do it and you present it at a council meeting and you ask it to be referred to committee, then everybody on council knows it. If you just have personal contact with the committee chairman, and then they have a discussion with a 3-person committee or a 4-person committee, then nobody else on council even knows it's being discussed until it gets to the committee of the whole. And I can understand why you might want to know about it in advance. So we'll go back to page 10. That would be the debate you would want to have amongst yourselves as to which you think is the appropriate format to approach issues and to present issues to your council. I'm assuming you've had orientation with regard to the presentation of motions and voting. I have a little section here. I want to clarify something that's confusing to even the most senior of legals that handle these meetings. There always is some confusion between emergency and suspension of the rules. And if anybody here is confused, let me just end that confusion. Emergency relates only to when the legislation takes effect, if it is passed. That's all the emergency provision does. You can keep an emergency provision in your legislation, and it can pass even on a 3rd reading, or on a 2nd reading, or on a 1st reading, if the rules are suspended for 1st and 2nd reading. And all emergency does is it allows it to take effect upon signature rather than waiting 30 days to take effect. That's critical in a lot of things where 30 days might be too late, such as you have a budget amendment that's coming up here that is the way you get money from the county. If you don't have that submitted to the county by a certain date in July, you might not get the millage that's currently authorized. So you might want to suspend and pass that so that the county doesn't cheat you out of money that you would otherwise be entitled to. So I want you to understand emergency only allows that to take effect immediately rather than waiting 30 days. Suspension of the rules allows it to be effective based upon 1 reading rather than 3 readings. So that's a non-standard method by which we approach these issues. One doesn't relate to the other. You actually have different votes. To suspend rules, you need 6 out of 7 votes. To emergency, you need 5 out of 7 votes. So even within the confines of your own charter, you have different numbers of votes that would allow that to take effect. There are motions that you can engage in for reconsideration. We've done that in the past, so just because it might fail at one meeting doesn't mean it can't be presented at another meeting. So it's not like it's failed forever. It can be modified, it can be amended. You can't generally, though, modify any agenda on a special meeting. Special meetings are set agendas. All right. Any amendment to legislation that substantially changes the nature of the effectiveness of that legislation, if it substantially alters how it will take effect or how it will impact the community, it goes back to a 3rd reading. It goes back to 1st reading after any amendment that would substantially alter that effect. And unfortunately for all of you, you can express your opinion, but that's probably a law department decision. All right? I tend to be a little more conservative. Pardon me?
Would you repeat that?
If any amendment substantially affects how that legislation is going to operate. For instance, you're now contemplating a 25% credit on your taxes versus 75%. Well, if you were looking at 75 and somebody amended it to go to a 25% credit, well, that's huge. That's like a big change. So I would probably suggest that that's a substantial enough change in that legislation that it should return it to a 1st reading. Okay?
Even though it's on a 2nd or 3rd?
Correct. If an amendment's made on a 3rd reading that substantially changes how it's going to take effect and how it's going to impact your community, I think I would be conservative enough to take that back to a 1st reading. Okay. Now, we all have figured out how to get around 1st reading, 2nd reading, and 3rd reading. You just call special meetings. Sometimes that's necessary, I don't want to debate that. I tend to like 3 readings, but I'm savvy enough and experienced enough in this area of the law to recognize the majority of the work that's done by the majority of the councils that I've had the pleasure to serve, they suspend rules on a regular basis because of matter of function. And the function is the debate process and how long you debate these issues. A lot of these issues are sophisticated, they require money management, coordination between departments, service departments, finance departments, reappropriating funds, grants and grant applications are all on timelines. Ordering salt under the state program is all on a timeline. We have certain time constraints and we have certain limitations that would require a lot of times a suspension of rules in order to be able to get things in this particular building season, or to get in before the state bids are closed and you're buying salt all on your own. So there are functional aspects, I think, that give rise to suspension of rules, rather than a lot of the perception to the public is that you're just suspending the rules because it's easier. I will admit that it might be easier under certain circumstances, but when you're having, how many meetings do you have a month?
Normally 2.
You have 2? Okay, so every time you go 3 meetings, you're talking about 6 weeks. Might not have that luxury. Okay. I guess that's kind of my little caveats of how I started here. When we talk about parliamentary procedure, this is my handbook. And in 25 plus years, I've never been able to open this book and not find an answer. And my captions on this little handbook is, what do I want to do? That's what this side of the book tells me. And then over here, it's voting. And how do we calculate votes, and when does it take a majority rule, when does it take 2/3 to take effect? And the voting would be limited then, of course, by your charter and your charter provisions, so a lot of that happens to be negated. I'm not bad at parliamentary procedure, I'm not bad at motions. The difficulty I have is that a lot of the motions that are available when you just pick up the book and you read it, nobody, including myself, is going to understand what you're attempting to do and what you're attempting to accomplish. I open up that door that just explain what it is you'd like to do. We will find an appropriate motion to make. There will be a decision. Most motions, I suggest to you, will require a second. Usually that's forthcoming. And then there are some motions that are non-debatable, like a motion to table. If all we're doing is we're moving it to the next meeting, that would be a motion to adjourn. I know all this stuff because I've looked at this book enough times that I just do it to check myself, to make sure that I'm giving you good guidance. But I'll be very, very candid with you. We never, ever, 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 ever really want to get there, and we really don't ever really want to go that direction, because it will get complicated and it will get confusing. And our duty to each other is not to confuse one another. Our duty to each other isn't to try and portray ourselves as parliamentarians and better at procedure. And I'm going to get one over on you because I know the parliamentary procedure rules better than you do. I don't want to extract any of my knowledge to anybody. And quite frankly, I'm here telling you it's pretty feeble in comparison to other people I know in this genre. And the seminars that I've attended on these things, there are people way, way, way better at this than me that you could bring in if you wanted a true parliamentarian to come in here and to educate you. That's not my role. My role is to try and make it functional so everybody gets their concerns heard in an appropriate way. It's to get on with the business of council, not to delay the business of council. It is to encourage ardent debate so that we can consider all positions and all rules and everything that needs to be considered and make informed decisions rather than uninformed decisions that haven't been fully vetted and haven't been fully debated. I like that debate process in the subcommittee and committee of the whole structure, because that's the most informal. Okay, usually it's 3 people, some people in the room, you might have some other council people, everybody can kind of like idea shop say, well, what about this and what about that? And that's kind of where you go and go through that vetting process. Then that council chairperson would present it to the committee of the whole. They would explain a little bit of the debate that took place in the committee structure so that you would have some understanding that, yeah, this was vetted, this was discussed, we considered this, we considered that, we considered all these things. This is why we think this would be something that you should think about. And then everybody can have a discussion based on that, and then the decision of the committee of the whole would be, do you want to present this to council? Do you not want to present this to council? In your current rule, you would start that debate, and you can do that in your council meeting, and then refer it to committee. And if this body thinks that's more transparent, I'd be with you, it's okay. Just, you know, be prepared when it comes time for comments from council persons. State what it is you think needs to be debated and give a suggestion as what committee you'd like that referred to. It doesn't really require a full motion and second at that point in time. It would be all in favor of referring that to committee for further review and discussion. Aye. The fear I have is if there's someone there that all of a sudden has 27 things referred to their committee in one meeting. And I've had that happen. So it depends on what committee you have and what the issues are. And then you're taking issues that might be appropriate to go to more than one committee. Council can also decide that too. And there might be. So there's some pros and cons. It's just an intellectual debate you'd have for yourself. So I know there's probably questions, and it's AG. I know you were very ardent in the last meeting that you wanted to clarify a few things procedurally, and I'm here to try and do that. If you have any further questions. How many of you are first-time council people in this elected time period? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you got 3 out of 7. That's a lot of turnover. So I'll try and do my best to answer any questions that you might have, if that's my preference on how to handle this from this time forward. And I may not have an answer if it isn't in this book.
Madam Chair, to Blair. Blair, 6.5 years, and we never had a challenge to the rules, council rules. And before that, when I came to meetings, I think they used the same rules. And every time that I would say, when talking amongst people or the council members, is you refer to the charter and the rules, and then if not, go to the Robert's Rules of Order to get your answer. Because most of the stuff that I've seen, 6.5 years and before, has always been in that charter and the rules. So to change it, we'd have to go back to school. We're bringing a voluntary in, and I don't see that. Because this has been enough for us. I don't know how long you've been here before us to know these rules, how long was in effect.
Madam Chair. Larry? You know, Mr. Adams, you're correct. You want to deal as close to home as you can. I tell everybody in America the best taxes you pay are your local taxes. The worst taxes you pay are your federal ones. And the reason for that is you're far away from your federal government, and you're close to home with your municipal government. So I say the same about rules. The further away you get from your local rules, the harder it is to justify and explain it. Because, you know, Roberts and parliamentary procedure is cold. It's just like it's calculating, it's cold, it's subject to chicanery that might not be Maple Heights. You know, we hope it isn't. Where when you get the opportunity to determine how you want to conduct your meetings and how you want to handle things, well, you get to put that homespun spirit on it, because when you start playing rule games, it goes over with your constituency like a hole in the wall. It just doesn't go over with them. They don't like arguing. They don't like to see they don't mind having a debate of an issue, and you're for it, and you're against it, and you're for it, and you're against it. They don't mind that. They think that's spirited. They think that's appropriate. They want the debate because then they have comfort that once it's debated and it's been fully discussed and vetted, they're gonna come to an appropriate decision. And when we're arguing about rules and procedure, they don't think that's getting on with the business of your city. They think of that as infighting. They think of that as malcontents, not getting along. And you don't have to agree, but I implore you please to get along. And so I would agree with you that we would want the charter, and we can't change the charter without a vote of the people. So the charter is what the charter is. The charter has certain language that's been incorporated in your rules. I don't think your rules should be modified to obstruct business. I don't think it should be modified to complicate business. I think it should be simplified, and I think we need to do that. Ultimately, when we get to the bottom line and to Robert's interpretation, I would tell you that the law department thinks that we're God. And I will just sit here and tell you that when I'm called to rule on the question, you don't have to agree with me. You might all disagree with me, but if you follow what I say, you can't do wrong. Okay? It's just not going to be subject to a challenge. You're following what the law department has to say with regard to the procedure of your meeting. That's not going to be challengeable. There isn't a court in the county or the state or the federal government that's going to allow that to be challenged. And there's statutory protection in the Ohio Revised Code that if you follow the law department's lead and you do what the law department says, none of you have any liability. And you're not going to subject it to that. So if that law were to get challenged and they say, oh, that was unconstitutionally put into effect because your law department made an incorrect interpretation of Robert's Rules of Orders, that will fail. And you know, because that's not what the courts are going to do. Now, that doesn't mean that if you think the law was wrong, that you as a council body can't come in and ask for reconsideration, ask for a new vote, present new information saying, this is why I think this need to come back. This has upset this constituency in our community, and I think we really ought to rethink our position. That happens regularly. And if I have to wear the hat that I caused that uproar, well, I'm lucky enough not to have to go to the voters and get reelected. You folks have to go to the voters and get reelected. So it's easy for me to wear that hat and say, well, hey, I made the best call that I could at the time. You want to reconsider it? It's okay.